So we met Thomas at the North American Mycological Association that was up in the Pacific Northwest, where actually I met him. And I had actually watched him just before I started talking to him. I watched him on the trail, and he was showing somebody. So up in that part of the country, there is an incredibly mucousy, sticky mushroom. And he was showing somebody this squishy, mucousy part and explaining it to someone. And he did a really great job. And I went, wow, you're an engaging speaker. And he likes educating people. And so then I started asking him, I noticed his sculpture on his beanie, which with incredible detail. I was like, so how did you make that? Because it didn't look like polymer clay. So some people know that I make lots of different things and I know about lots of different fabrications. Didn't look like polymer clay. And I was like, and it was really detailed. And he said, oh, I 3D printed it. And I went, that looks way better than most 3D printed stuff I've seen. And I said, but it doesn't look like regular 3D printing. And he said, it's not. It's something I've developed. And I was like, oh, okay, that explains a lot. So I just kept talking to him a little bit more. And I asked him, I said, so do you do presentations on this? And he said, I haven't, but he was willing to give it a try. And we were willing to bring him. And Sam admitted later that he was a little bit skeptical. Then he saw Thomas did a presentation for us on Zoom, and Sam was sold. So I'm really glad you guys came out to see. I was just impressed with somebody who was just so engaged with mushrooms that he went ahead and figured out how to launch this business for himself. And it's really inspiring that he's also been in the corporate world and decided that was not the life he wanted. And this is instead what he figured out to do. And he has a really engaging story. And I'm really happy that he's come to join us and do this talk. So I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you so much. Oh boy. Stakes are high now, aren't they? I know. I'm extremely excited to be here. As just mentioned, this is my first presentation I've ever done, so hopefully it'll go out well. But I'm extremely excited to be sharing my story with you all. And yeah, so as Cornelia just mentioned, my name is Thomas Young, and I'm here to tell you about my mushroom obsession and how I found my niche within the mycological community. What niche is that? Well, I'm happy you asked, handsome young man. For the past 2 years, I've been running a business by the name of ClusterMush, where I make fungal art and educational material to help promote just the focus and on fungi in the general public. As many of you have probably seen, there has been a large surgence in attention towards fungi over the past couple of years. And as I was saying, for the past 2 years, I've been running the business ClusterMush to help promote the education and understanding of our fungal friends. And so, as many of you have probably seen, there's been a rise in popularity in mushrooms over the past several years, and this is pretty fantastic for the mycological community and fungi in general. However, much of the information out there can be sometimes somewhat surface level, misleading, or just hard to digest. And so with this, there are two main goals that ClusterMush tries to fulfill. The first is, come on. All right, there you go. Okay, thank you. So the first is to generate interest in mushrooms using unique pieces of art. And then the second is to help grow current mycological fascination into a long-standing cultural interest through education especially focusing in on combating mycophobia in the American mindset. And so my current main focus is on creating scientifically accurate fungal jewelry. The goal here is that people will wear these earrings and catch the attention of others around them. And then once their attention has been captured, the person can come in and kind of ask them about their earrings. And the wearer can share some of the information which they have learned on my website, where each mushroom gets a dedicated page where I talk about things like cultural significance, historical context, and break down scientific literature to make it a little bit easier to digest and learn about fungi, and especially focusing on their importance from around the world. Now, if you're like many of the people that I talk to at markets, you might be asking yourself, why? Why do I do this? And really, it boils down to three main things: art, education, and, of course, mushrooms. And as described earlier, this is the gooey mushroom where I'm holding it up. It's the cow's nose mushroom, and it's one of my favorites, Gomphidius subroseus. But yeah, it's fantastic. And so from a young age, I have changed and evolved and learned so many different things. However, there is one thing that has remained constant, and that is my desire to be an artist. Along with that, I also still find Scooby-Doo to be my favorite movie and book. And just like mushrooms, I love rice. But growing up, I had many classes in school that encouraged me to pursue many creative efforts, whether that was dance, art, music, cooking, and these really encouraged me to continue doing creative things outside of school. And so at first, most of this was 2D art. I focused a lot on drawing, painting, pen and ink, things like that, but slowly got out of my comfort zone and started doing things like woodworking, making custom clothing and accessories, and of course, 3D printing and painting miniatures. I tried many times to have success as an artist trying to sell my things, but it didn't go quite as I had hoped. Most of my successes had come after I had chosen my career path and gone to college. And so these are some of the things that I got to do, which was a lot of fun, but didn't really help. And so getting to participate, making a logo for my dorm, making some stickers for the tech support that I worked on, and also helping design a little mascot for the team I worked on at AWS. But as I mentioned, I had already chosen my path, and that path was studying computer science at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I loved it. I love learning, and I especially love computers. And so it was a fantastic time, and I got to really dive deep into a subject that I had already found a lot of care in prior to going to college. And so it was fantastic. One thing I did learn, though, along that in that time frame, was that I also love teaching, and especially teaching people about things that I care about, so that I can get other people excited about them and build some more community and generate just talk about it. And so throughout college, I got to do some things like helping my best friend Alex here get through his data science class. I got to participate and be a lead programming instructor at a summer camp in my hometown. And I also got to take a really cool class on computer science education of K through 12, which really focused on creating a inclusive environment and bringing marginalized groups such as people of color and women into the field of computer science at a young age and making them feel welcomed. And so it was just all it was very fascinating to me to try to get people into something that I cared so much about. One quick note, though, is that man Alex there is actually the person who taught me to 3D print, and without him, I would not be doing what I'm doing today. So definitely a shout out to this young man here. But as I said, I graduated and I joined the corporate world, and for about 2.5 years, I worked at Amazon as a software engineer. And I did not really like it. Something that I had loved so much, working with computers, had become somewhat of a pain for me. The experience really drained me and left me unsatisfied with my career. And so during this time, I did happen to watch um, a fantastic film which brought me into the world of fungi, and that, of course, is Fantastic Fungi. This movie truly opened my eyes to the world of mushrooms. Before this, I hadn't really known too much about their ecological importance, the variety out there, um, all their medicinal purposes, gourmet. I had known a little bit about some of it, but really had not known much at all. And so this movie was kind of like the uh, the hole which I looked through to see a whole new world to possibly become part of. But I didn't actually start taking part in learning about fungi until a couple months after, when I was given the opportunity to try entheogenic mushrooms. It was a pretty revolutionary experience for me. It really, I mean, I can't describe it. If you've ever had such an opportunity, it's really something like nothing you've ever had. And so this was really the tipping point, along with the movie, to push me into the world. And at this point, I started learning to cultivate mushrooms. And because I was cultivating an illegal substance, I couldn't just go down to my local store and pick up a grow kit. I couldn't just buy a block from them and just sprout them up at home. And so I had to really dive deep into what into the process of growing mushrooms. And so started learning about things like growing on agar, picking out specific types of grain, creating proper environments, and this is really what then again propelled me into the world of mycology. I had started looking for the magic in these specific mushrooms, but I ended up learning that there was so much more magic in mushrooms than just this. And so I continued learning as much as I possibly could. I read as many books as I could. I bought a fancy camera so I could learn how to do macro photography. And possibly the most influential thing in my career was joining the Puget Sound Mycological Society. This club was truly amazing. Part of it, I was able to take part in many different volunteer. Uh, um, I got to volunteer a lot, and so part of this, I was able to go to the Bridle Trails State Park and go out with some incredibly smart people and learn how to properly identify, how to record them, and how to prepare them for sequencing. I additionally did a similar effort with the Mycoblitz Committee, where we went out all around the Cascades and collected as many mushrooms as we possibly could and sent them in for sequencing so that we could figure out what's growing in our areas in specific times of year. In addition to this, probably one of the most fun things I got to do was go on the PSMS led forays, where we got to go out again, learn more about identification, learn about ecology, learn about where we can actually find mushrooms, and then at the end of each of the meetings, we would get to bring all of the mushrooms we collected, put them on a big table, and this man who must have been 500 years old would come out and just rattle mushrooms off the top of his head like it was nothing. He would come out, point out, and be like, that one shouldn't be here. That's a spring mushroom. Or like, oh, that mushroom definitely grew under this tree. And just really amazed me in his ability to just know everything about a field that seems so shallow or not really, there wasn't much to it before. One special shout out is to the amazing Sandra Ruffner, who I unfortunately don't have a photo of her, but I do have a photo of her hands right here, where she's holding the flowery amanita. But she saw my interest in mycology and my passion for it and volunteered to take me out several times, over half a dozen times, and teach me everything she knows about mushrooms. And in addition to that, also teach me what it means to be a naturalist and to really admire the beauty and complexity of nature. And so without her, again, I don't think I would be here because I think my learning progress would have been much slower and possibly led to burnout or anything. And so she was definitely a very influential person for me. But along with this new passion for fungi, I also rekindled a passion for just the general environment, something that was highly taught in my hometown of Berkeley, California. Growing up here, the importance of nature and the environment was highly emphasized and was taught throughout my entire education from K through 12. There were many different people, experiences, places that really taught me as much as I could about why we should be respecting the environment. But from all these experiences, there's really two people I wanted to shout out. And the first of them is my mother, Terry Betts. She is a lover of food and a chef of her own. And through food, she was able to teach me about nature and not just why we should be preserving it, but also how to take advantage of it and be able to make some absolutely incredible food. In addition to this, she would also take time out of her day to take me on hikes through the Tilden Regional Park in the hills of Berkeley. She would also organize camping trips for us to go all around Northern California and experience everything that nature had to offer. And so without her, she really kind of lit that spark in me and kind of got me curious about going out in the woods and just learning as much as I could. The second person is Rivka Mason, who was my gardening teacher in elementary school. She is an absolutely incredible woman. She is actually the person who brought the gardening program to Berkeley and all of the Berkeley Unified School Districts, or all the Berkeley Unified School District schools, which is, I mean, I think there's over 10 elementary schools in Berkeley, so it was not a small task. Part of this, she got to teach us all sorts of things, such as knowing what good dirt is and being able to distinguish healthy land from something that has been mistreated, being able to grow fruits and vegetables and the importance of eating seasonally, something that was also taught by my mom. And in addition to this, something that really has influenced me in my own education on my website is teaching about the cultural significance of agriculture, such as talking about groups like the United Farms Workers or Cesar Chavez, and how agriculture is inherently intertwined with culture, and you can't really talk about one without bringing up the other. So that really influenced how I brought information to my website and what I decided to collect. But possibly the most important thing she did for us, for me, was adding a fourth R to reduce, reuse, recycle, which introduced me to one of the main ecological niches of mushrooms, and that is, of course, rot. You know, this was my first introduction without me knowing to fungi, and although decomposition is only a small part of the mushroom ecology, it is a significant part. So outside of this, that was pretty much all I got to learn about mushrooms when I was growing up. Another small note, in my elementary school, we did have, in my fifth grade, we put on a version of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, where instead of being haunted by his past, present, and future, he was haunted by some particularly environmentally friendly ghosts, and teaching us why we should be doing, why we should reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot. But as I said, this was not really talked too much else throughout my education, except for in high school when this photo of the carbon cycle would come up and my biology teacher would point to the little decaying organisms down in the corner and say, these guys are important, mushrooms are included in them, without them we'd have a bad time, but that's pretty much all we're going to talk about. And so it wasn't until the Fantastic Fungi movie where I really got to open my mind to these opportunities and these ideas. And so with all of those things, with the art, the education, and now my newfound love of mushrooms, I followed the wise words of Gary Linkoff, and yeah, well, we'll see. I guess it won't play, but pretty much he's saying the quote is that you should stop what you're doing, stop everything, quit your job, and dedicate your life to mushrooms. Really emphasizing that. And, that is exactly what I did. I quit my job in February of 2023 and opened shop with ClusterMush. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when quitting my job, but I knew I wanted to do something mushroom related. And over the following few months, I slowly developed and figured out that I was going to try to make some kind of scientifically accurate art and landed on jewelry. And so now you know why I do what I do. And now the next thing you might be wondering is, how do I do what I do? How do I actually come up with each of the mushrooms that I make and fabricate them into the tiny little creations that they are? And the process really can be boiled down to three main steps, and that is research, design, and release. With these three parts, I'm able to learn as much as I can about a mushroom, create the tiny creation, and spread all the knowledge that I had learned with everybody else that I could. And so with the first step, research, I start with picking a mushroom. And this process, I try to be very intentional in it. I don't just try to pick a random mushroom. I really try to ask myself questions like, is there a specific message I want to convey? Like with my first set, trying to focusing on gourmet mushrooms, trying to get people out to try mushrooms that are not the normal like portobello and cremini and champignon, trying to try some things that are outside of the box of normal mushrooms. In addition to this, I try to think about things like what's popular, what might be aesthetically pleasing or just fun. And I ruminate on this as much as I can. And so for an example of a mushroom, we will take a look at the fly agaric. And I know you're probably thinking, of course he's going to make the fly agaric. That's the mushroom that everybody knows. And that is true. And that is the first reason I do it. It's extremely popular. You can see it all throughout pop culture. You see it in old illustrations. And up until last year, it was the only representation of mushrooms as an emoji. And so it's popular, but oftentimes it's misrepresented, just like the emoji and just like these pieces of art. And although I love all of these, I think they have a place in mycological art. They don't necessarily give people a proper idea of what the mushroom looks like. I mean, the middle one is mine and I love it to bits, but that is not what a fly agaric looks like. And so I wanted to create something that could maybe be a little bit more educational and really show the natural beauty of the mushroom. Next, with that natural beauty, it's a pretty neat looking mushroom. I mean, look at it. It's red. It comes in all sorts of colors, like red, orange, yellow. It has all these little white spots all over it. I mean, that one kind of looks like a little punk rock kind of guy. And so they're just really cool looking. And so they lend well to just a visual medium. And finally, the other, I'm trying with my business, I'm trying to get people out into the woods. I don't want them just to love mushrooms, but I want them to go experience it. And the fly agaric is everywhere. And so if people see the mushroom, they can then be encouraged to go out in their woods or even just around their neighborhood and try to see the mushroom for themselves, because it's not that hard to find if you're really looking for it in the right places. Obviously, there's some places like in the Midwest here that might be a little tricky to find, but it's still a pretty easy mushroom to find if you just look out for it. And so this is the main process of me picking out the mushroom. And once I know what mushroom I want to work on, I move on to figuring out what it looks like, doing a little bit of investigation about its features, using as many resources as I can. And so you can see here, this is my little mushroom library. I pull out all of them that I can. and look at all of the identifiable features that each of them talk about. And these are some of my favorite of these resources. Definitely a special shout out to Tom Volk's Mushroom of the Month. If you haven't heard of it, it is possibly the most fun way to learn about mushrooms. It's a website straight out of the 90s, written by one of the most amazing mycologists in history, I think. Um, and then, along with looking at all these books and websites, I also try to go out and collect my own specimens. And so, like I said, there are mushrooms, these are everywhere. And this is one that I found just a couple blocks from my house in Seattle. Now, it was Seattle, so it's raining a lot. And so maybe I get a little bit more mushrooms than normal, but you can find it. And so, with all these, I can then start diving into what the mushroom actually looks like to to as much detail as I can. And so, for example, with the this book, this is Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora. I pull it out, and my goal is to write down as many physical features as I can, so that if someone were to hand me a piece of paper with just these notes on it, I would, in theory, be able to replicate the mushroom from just that without any photos. And so, as you can see here, I have some interesting things like the cap size, the stem size, talking about some of the other features like the color, talking about the white fragments on the top, talking about the gill attachment being adnet, adnex or free. And so with this, I get a pretty good idea of what the mushroom actually looks like. But there is still a little bit of information that is lost in these books. And that's where the specimens I collect come in. With the specimens, I try to look at a lot of the more artistic features that are not necessary for identification, but can really sell the the visual beauty of it on its own. And so one example here is the stipe texture. So right above the annulus, it'll be a lot smoother than below. And so I try to represent that in my mushrooms. And so there's a little bit of texture up here, but most of it is at the bottom. And so try to get that in there. In addition, there's also the spots on top. The book does mention that there are white spots, but it doesn't really go into detail about those spots. So like on the edge here, they're a lot smaller, they're more numerous, and versus the top where they're a lot bigger and almost cottony. And so I try to represent that in my own mushrooms with having a lot more of the smaller dots on the rim versus a lot of big ones on top. And so now I know what the mushroom looks like, and I'm able to create my visual representation. But before I start getting into that, I first start doing a little bit of research about the background of the mushroom. Like I mentioned, I have a lot of educational content on my website focusing on the cultural significance, historical context, and scientific literature around that specific mushroom. So I dive into some of my favorite resources about the mushroom. And these are some of them that I really like. I highly recommend checking them out. But so I look at all of these and I start doing a little bit of preliminary gathering. One of my favorite resources that I think is hated on a little bit too much is Wikipedia. Although it's not a primary source and it's not one that I'm going to be citing myself, it is a fantastic way to get at least a high level overview of what information is actually out there about this mushroom and being able to just figure out, getting an idea of what I might be seeing. And so I read through the wiki pages of the mushroom, and it's also a great resource because although it's not a primary resource, they are cited all over, and so oftentimes you can find well documented papers and interviews and resources that can then be actually used on the website for proper citing. In addition to this, I like to watch YouTube videos, again, for a similar reason where I can get a nice high-level overview. And I also dive into some more scholarly resources such as Google Scholar and OneSearch, which is a search engine built into individual libraries. And so I search the OneSearch for the University of Colorado, where I went to school. And you're able to get peer-reviewed journals with a lot of really interesting information. with this information, I can then start pulling out individual articles that I actually want to start summarizing on my website. And so we can see here, there's one article talking about Siberia and Northeast Asia and the traditional uses of the Amanita muscaria, especially around shamanism and how it may differ between regions. There's also an interesting journal or article I found talking about the myth that Norse berserkers ate the Amanita muscaria to enter their berserker rage, but instead proposes a new theory that it was honestly less likely for them to be consuming this mushroom and more likely for them to be consuming the black henbane nightshade, just because it grew a lot more around that area and the symptoms of eating it lined up a lot more with the Norse berserkers. And then finally, one of my favorite things to try to collect is the folklore about mushrooms in these different regions. And so this one here, the War of the Mushrooms, it's a pretty funny one. It's pretty much summed up where the King Bolit hears that King P is going to wage war on his kingdom, and so he sends out someone to talk to each of the different mushrooms and ask them to fight in his army. And they all give these excuses of, oh, I'm too old, too fragile, I just don't care. And in the end, the only mushroom that actually goes to fight is the Lactarius, because apparently milk taps are very, very dedicated to the throne. I guess so. I don't know. But it's a pretty funny one. But so yeah, so now I have the specific things I'm going to put on my website, and I can move on to one of the most fun parts, which is actually designing the mushroom. And so with this, I can start getting into my computer, 3D modeling, preparing it for printing, and fabricating it. So I start with 3D modeling it. For 3D modeling, I use a program called Blender. If you haven't heard of it before, it is an absolutely incredible resource. It's completely free, just the cost of a computer, which can be quite expensive, but compared to other resources and software, it's a lot more. It's pretty reasonable. And so Blender, free. It's also open source. So if you want to change something, you could go and change something yourself and add features to it. And the results is that it allows pretty much the average person to be able to create models and animations that rival that of Pixar and Disney. And it's really incredible. So in Blender, I start modeling, and in the modeling process, I start with really basic shapes and get like the sizing proper, and I start using that information I collected before to start deforming it, shaping it, so making it kind of flat, and then adding a little bit of texture. I'll then smooth the mushroom cap out to look like an actual mushroom cap, and then adding more features to it. So like the stem here, one thing you'll notice is that I emphasize a lot of the features here because at this size, they look a little bit weird, but when you scale it down to about an inch, you really need to kind of dramatize all of these little pieces, or else they don't really show up particularly well. And so you can see here, I now am kind of molding it, shaping it kind of like some clay. Then I'll use some special fancy computer generation to add my spots on top and dynamically change them based on how close they are to the edge. And then I'll start adding the gills in, making sure the attachment is correct, filling it out, and then I'll continue to use some fancy computer generation to add texture and start forming the annulus. And soon enough here, we'll see I'm adding the extra texture that you'll see at the bottom. And after all this, you have a little tiny mushroom that you can then go and print. And so once I have the model, this is when I actually start thinking about what I want it to be. Now, you may be thinking, wouldn't you want to think about what kind of earring it is at the beginning so you can properly shape the model to fit it? And that would be a reasonable thing to do, but I personally think that the mushrooms can speak for themselves. They have their own natural beauty, and I think that gives them a unique flair when used in jewelry form. And so with a lot of these shelf fungi, they do really well as studs and pins. And I love it because it kind of looks like it's growing out of your ears and clothing versus something like this red cage stinkhorn here, which doesn't really lend well to a pin, but looks great as a little dangly earring. But at the moment, I only do pins, dangles, and studs, but there's really a lot of things that I could be doing, and I really want to be doing. I'd love to do necklaces, charms, maybe even little tiny dioramas. I think there's a million things that I could be doing, and so um, it's really exciting to have just an endless amount of opportunities. And so now that I have the mushroom model ready for printing, I start the printing process. With that, I import the model into a program called Lychee. There's a lot of alternatives to it, but the main purpose of Lychee is to take 3D models and prepare them for printing them. And that preparation starts with doing some basic transformation where I'm orienting the mushroom to an ideal position so that I can reduce printing errors, so I can reduce any breaking or layer lines forming. And then I also will play around a little bit with the scaling. I'll print them in a bunch of different scales to see what might fit best as an earring. Once I have that down, then I go on to adding supports to the mushroom. Similarly to the orienting, this is to help it actually print properly throughout, so there's no errors, there's no layer lines, nothing breaks, and it is the actual thing that will adhere the mushroom to the build plate. And so the raft right here, I will get to that right next. But so yeah, this base raft is what will actually stick to the build plate instead of the mushroom. And then the final step is to add a tiny little hole right here. And this is where I actually insert the loop for the jewelry. And right here, it kind of shows up as a cylinder, but it carves it out for me, which is really nice. And then before I start printing, I'll talk a little bit about what kind of printing I do. So when I say 3D printing, most of the time people think about filament printing. And this is the most common type of 3D printing and has been around at least to the public for the longest. And the main idea behind it is taking pieces of plastic filament and pushing it through a hot extruder and slowly building up the melted plastic in layers over and over again until you get a tiny little creation like this boat here. And it's pretty amazing that you can do this just at home. However, this doesn't really work great for me. And that's because, as many of you have probably seen in 3D printing, it produces some pretty significant layer lines, and it's not necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing. And to make it look really nice, you have to go through a lot of post-processing, and it's just not the best. And so instead, I use a process called resin printing. With the resin printing, I use a liquid resin that cures with UV light. And it's kind of similar to if you've ever gotten your nails done and they put a little bit of resin on them and you put your nails underneath the UV light. It's the exact same thing, just with much higher precision. And so the results of this are creating tiny models that have almost no layer lines to them. And that's because the layers, instead of being about 2.2 millimeters thick with filament, they are about 20 microns or 0.02 millimeters thick. So you could see them, the layer lines, but you'd have to look really close. And so that's is pretty much what has enabled me to make my tiny mushrooms. Though, as amazing as this is, there are a few drawbacks that I do have to mention, and that is safety. You have to be extremely careful around the resin because it is toxic, both the resin itself and the isopropyl alcohol, which is used in the post-processing. And so for all of this, you have to make sure you're wearing gloves because if you touch the resin too much, it will actually develop an allergy on your skin and you'll start to itch, and it's quite terrible. Don't ask me how I know. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to wear a respirator and make sure you have proper ventilation. my printer's right there, and there's a little vent going up to the top of the roof. And because the fumes that come off of this are pretty gnarly and are not pleasant. And so with all this, as long as you're following proper safety, you can really create some amazing things. But now that we know how to be safe and what kind of printing I'm doing, we can look at the actual process. And so for this, the process starts with actually printing the mushrooms. And so the build plate goes into the liquid there. And after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the mushroom, I get a field of tiny little mushrooms on the supports. I've now printed hundreds of mushrooms, and it still feels like magic to me every time this comes out. Next, I break the mushrooms off of their supports and put them into a isopropyl alcohol bath. And the purpose of this is to remove any excess resin that's on the outside so that I can then properly cure them in the curing station so that they can actually be touched. Once the resin has been washed off and gone through the final curing, they are safe to handle and are ready for quality control. In the quality control, I look around them, check to make sure that there's, again, no printing errors, nothing came out looking weird, that the model is generally strong and not going to break easily. And I'll go through several iterations of this over and over again, trying to refine it down to the best thing that I can make. But once I'm done with the quality control, I then move on to painting. And so one thing that a lot of people will ask me is how long it takes me to make the mushrooms, and it greatly varies. The modeling process can take several days to do, but once I've done that, I have the model to then produce over and over and over again. And after that, the thing that takes up the most time is honestly the painting, because each of these I'm going through and hand painting them. So they start with just a priming, and that's either using an airbrush for more fine control or a spray paint can for more mass production. And then I go on to painting the base layers. And so with the base layers, I either, again, use an airbrush or spray paint. And for the fly agaric, I just put down a base red and a little bit of orange. And then finally, with some of the mushrooms that I do, they require some really fine details, such as the tiny white spots on the cap. And I go in with a tiny paintbrush and paint every single dot by hand. And this takes a long time. It's a very good time to practice being meditative, listening to music, and just really sinking into the art and enjoying it. Next, I finally put a little protective layer using the Mod Podge here. It's just essentially a glue that you spray on. And after a couple coats, it creates a level of protection that works great for earrings. It's not super great against like metal, so that's one of the reasons why I haven't made a keychain, but it protects it from water and basic scratching. I've even put some of my earrings through the wash on accident a couple times, and they've come out fine, which is honestly pretty crazy. And so once they're protected, I then move on to attaching the jewelry findings to it. And so that little hole that I mentioned before, that's what I'm inserting this jewelry loop into. And so there's a little hook on the end that attaches into that hole. And then I use some extra UV glue to glue it in place. I put it under a UV lamp, and it holds the loop in surprisingly well. It will actually, if you try to pull it out, it will break the mushroom before it breaks the connection. And then finally, I add the tiny little hook at the end. And with that, the earrings are done. And I have a tiny scientific representation of a real life mushroom. And it's pretty satisfying at this point. It can be a little bit of a slog to get to here because it's a lot of effort and it's fun, but this is truly the most satisfying part of the process, seeing them come out. Now that I have the mushrooms, I move on to the final step, which is release. And the overall goal of this part is to get people interested in my earrings and also spread all of the knowledge that I've gained throughout this whole process with as many people as I can. So the first thing I do is I update my educational pages on my website. So as I mentioned before, each mushroom gets a dedicated page where I share all that information that I collected about the mushrooms throughout the process. Another resource I have on my website is called the Ethnoclusterium, which is my mycocompendium, which is oh my gosh, the clustered compendium of the mycomillennium. Thank you. And so the Ethnoclusterium is an interactive map you can click through and get to a set of articles that I have written that are a little bit longer than just the little notes that I've made on each of the educational pages, talking about folklore, talking about traditional uses, just really anything that I can find that has a little bit more substance, that has specific geographic areas that they pertain to. And so the example here is I can click on like the Europe, Russia area, and it zooms in, and then it shows a list of articles talking about the fly agaric, or really any mushroom in the Russia-European region. Next, I do the normal business things of creating a store page, coming up with some kind of catchy slogan for the earrings to captivate people, taking a ton of high quality photos for them, which I now have a fancy camera for all the macro photography, which is pretty convenient, and creating the store page. And possibly the most fun part of this is, come on now, is coming up with some social media for the for each of the mushrooms, or for the mushroom that I created. Let's see, there we go. And so I talk about things like the Norse berserker myth that I mentioned before, show off my my painting process and my printing process, and also talk about each of the little details that I try to include in the mushroom. And this is all posted on Instagram for as many people to see, so I can really share my passion and love for fungi and try to get other people excited about it as well. And that's pretty much the final part of releasing it. I've now told people about it, and I will start doing my rounds at markets, trying to do as many events as I can to get people interested. And yeah, and the final thing I want to say is just, this isn't just me. I have an incredibly supportive family who has gone to some pretty great lengths to support me in following my dreams in creating this business. And so I have my dad and my mom here who have done several markets for me for free, and just will have driven hours to go to markets for several days on end, and they're just super supportive. My two brothers who have also done markets with me, my younger brother Adam, who is actually helping me with the production now, because it takes up a lot of time, and I want to keep creating things, and so he has been incredibly helpful. And then finally, I cannot leave out my partner here, Rocky, who is over in the corner over there. And she has probably been the most supportive of anybody, because she has seen me through my highest highs and my lowest lows throughout this business, and has continuously encouraged me to, again, follow my dreams and do what I love to do. And I absolutely could not have done it without her. And then there's also my puppy Boomy in the background right there. He's just really cute. And with that, that's come on, you. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's my story. That's how I do what I do and why I do what I do. Thank you.
So
yeah, does anybody have any questions about anything I've talked about, or anything they'd be interested to know more about?
How big is your product line so far? How many mushrooms do you have included?
And if you can repeat his question for the Zoom audience.
Oh yeah. So the question is, how big is my product line? How many mushrooms do I actually have? And it's a bit of a hard thing to say, because there are some mushrooms that I'll add and only have around temporarily, and then because they're either not as popular or take a good amount of effort to create, I don't always continue making them. But I think I've done, I want to say around like 22.
Some of those are like available and stud and most of that have some receipts, but yeah.
Okay, there's 22 products. I think I've done like 12 to 14 mushrooms. Maybe more though, apparently. But yeah, and so I think the thing I really want to do is just continue making more and more mushrooms. Like I want to avoid just being a factory, and I want to continue making new and interesting ones, because I think once I get out of the normal, like the regular like gourmet mushrooms that you're seeing, like your lion's manes and your makatsutakes and your morels, I can really start digging into some like really out there mushrooms like various mycenas or entelomas, and that I think will be super cool to do. Yeah.
And there's 10 different kinds
Oh,
of species right here.
wow. Okay, so there's probably more than 14 that I've done that. I have no idea.
Good thing you have a great partner.
Yeah, truly. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with resin printing.
Mhm.
So is that program that you put the supports in?
Mhm.
Is that it was super cool, like you heard the sideways.
Mhm.
kind of up and
Yeah.
Is that specific to resin printing?
Yeah. So just to repeat the question, the question was asking about the 3D printing process specific to resin printing, and how I'm orienting the mushroom in the I guess the program is called the slicer, but the program that I actually prepare it for 3D printing. So not Blender, but Lychee. Lychee. I never know which one it is actually. But and so is the orienting specific to resin printing? And I would say yes and no. I would say like short answer yes, in that because a lot of normal filament printing, you're able to print directly on the bed. Oftentimes you'll try to have like flat parts, or you will have other supports going up. But with resin printing, you generally don't want to just print on the bed, because it can be really hard to get it off and leads to possible breaking and other issues down the line. And another thing, and another kind of defect that happens called elephant footing, where the part that's touching the bed will actually kind of like almost like it looks like it's pooling out. And so when I'm orienting it, the idea is to try to reduce as many overhangs as possible, so that I can also have as little supports as possible, while also encouraging it to not have any specific places where it might snap off, or or break, or also trying to get proper angles to reduce the amount of layer lines that could be seen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 So the question is, how do I get it off of the supports? And I have my supports set up in such a way that I can literally just snap them off. They're so the points that in which they connect to the model are so small that they can individually, they're pretty easy to break. And that's why I have many supports attached to it. And so I'm able to just kind of crack it off, and that'll generally do the thing. If I do need to do anything, sometimes I use some just like wire cutters, and will clip anything off if they're particularly tough. But yeah, just snapping them, which is pretty satisfying. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, no, I think that would be awesome. I think most of the education I've gotten in terms of miniature painting comes from watching people paint other kind of miniatures. Like if anyone's ever heard of like D&D or like Warhammer, a lot of videos like that, people who are really into painting miniatures. So learning that, and so it's definitely quite inspirational to maybe do something like that. Yeah, one thing that I really oh yes, thank you. So the question was would I ever think about releasing them for other people to paint? So just either maybe just giving the model out or selling an unpainted mushroom. And I've definitely thought about that. I think that would be a super cool thing to do, especially because some of the mushrooms, like the fly agaric, they come in so many different colors, and it takes a lot of time for me to paint them. And so doing all the colors can sometimes not be super practical. And so if you buy it, then you can kind of paint it however you really want. Or if you really want, you can paint it with colors that aren't realistic and just fit your vibes. But another thing that I've been trying to work out is having a little workshop where I bring in some unpainted mushrooms and teach people how to do miniature painting. But yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know. I don't. It's like I don't own this book. We went to a in Golden Gate Park. There's the Academy of Sciences, and they had a mushroom night. So you came in. There was like music and drinks and all sorts of vendors, mushroom related. And we went, and I went in the gift shop and saw this book, and my hair was doing something, and so I held up the book and thought it was funny, and Regina took this photo actually, but I unfortunately don't know. I embarrassingly don't know what book that is. I think it's published by DK. Yeah. hmm Yeah. I had to hold myself. I have a policy that I'm only allowed to buy one book at every mushroom fair I go to. Um, Otherwise, I would be losing money every time I went to one, which would be bad because it's my income. And so I had already spent my money at this point, so I had to walk away from the book. Um, but I've had my eye on it. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So the question was, what is my most popular species so far? And it probably is the fly agaric, which somewhat unsurprisingly, I think, because everybody has seemed to know it just because of pop culture or some way. Though the next one after that is probably the most popular is the chicken of the woods, and that one definitely kind of surprised me. I thought it looks really cool, and I love how it looks like it's growing out of your ears, but I did not think it was going to be nearly as popular as it was, and so those ones I go through pretty quickly as well. Yeah. hmm hmm Yeah. So if you go up there, I have two colors of oyster mushrooms. I have Oh, sorry. The question. Sorry, I'm messing this one up. The question is, if I would do different colors of just a single species or genus of mushroom. So, for example, the oyster mushroom comes in a rainbow of colors, and my answer is yes, I absolutely would, and I have. So, for example, the oyster mushroom, I have two species up there. I have Porotus austratus, the pearl oyster mushroom, and I also have Porotus jamor. Think I'm pronouncing that correct, but that's the pink oyster mushroom. And so, but I wanted to do a ton of other like various colored ones. Like I think it would be cool to do a bunch of the other oyster mushroom colors, especially because a lot of the oyster mushrooms they look pretty similar with with just a color change versus some other species. So like the chicken of the woods, there's a bunch of different varieties of chicken of the woods with different colors. However, the different colors look different. So like this one is just Litoporus sulphureus, which is like the classic shape and color. But there's also Litoporus cincinnatus, which is, I think it's a little bit thinner and smaller, but it's like red and white, which looks really cool. But I would have to make a new model or edit the model to be able to fit that new color. Yeah. Any other questions I can answer? Yes. Yeah, so the question is if someone wants to request a mushroom or try to suggest one that I should do next, how would they do that? And I would say the best way would either be just reaching out to me over Instagram, just a direct message, or on my website um, there is a contact form for me, so you can just fill that out and send me an email. I'm pretty chatty. I'm very happy to talk about other possibilities. Like I did one pair of custom mushroom earrings for someone in Seattle. It was oh my god, it was Laratiomyces ceres, the chip cherry, and they were not really a mushroom person. They just came across it, knew about me, and took a photo of it. Was like, "Can you make me an earring of this?" And so I made just one pair of them. And so they have the only chip cherry I've ever made. Actually, that's a lie. I have a pair of them too. But yeah. Um, mhm, mhm, mhm. Correct. I could. Yes. That's a good question. I mean, I'm happy to make more of them. But for that one specific one, I probably will not be making a mass number of them. Um, oh yeah, sorry. And the question was it a limited edition one? Um, is it a limited edition? And the answer, yeah, I would make more on request, but I probably for the chip cherry will not be coming out with large batches of them because there's other ones that I would like to prioritize. Oh, cool. Cool. It's going on the list. Fungi Discover the Science is the book up there by Lynn with an E. Lynn Boddy, Boddy. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.